So, hello, everybody. My name is Irina Paert, and I am a PI of the research project based at the School of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of Tartu. And this project deals with the practices of conciliarity in Orthodoxy in Estonia in the long 20th century. And the webinars that have been carried out this year are called Understanding Sobornost. So the concept that is very important for this project, that is a combination of theology and church history. And I am very happy that today Andrey Shishkov, who is a co-host of this seminar, will introduce our next speaker, Dr. Sebastian Rimestad. So welcome, and so the floor is to you, Andrey.
Thank you, Irina. I'm glad to introduce our speaker, Dr. Sebastian Rimestad, who is a senior researcher at the University of Leipzig. He defended his doctor's degree in 2011 in Erfurt on the topic challenges of modernity to the Orthodox Church in Estonia and Latvia at the period between world wars. And today, Sebastian will speak about the crisis in the Paris Exarchate at 2013 and 2019. The Paris Exarchate, or officially the Exarchate of the parishes of the Russian tradition in Western Europe, has always considered itself heir to the tradition of the Moscow Council of 19 and 17. We have already spoken about the Soviet renewalists who sought to develop the principles of Sobornost laid down by the council. The second major center of this tradition was precisely the Exarchate. It is no secret that in 2018, the Exarchate was abolished by the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which led to the division within and the transfer of part of it, led by Archbishop John Renetta, to the Moscow Patriarchate. It should be noted that this is not the first time the See of Constantinople has abolished an exarchate. But what is this? A crisis of conciliarity or a clash between two fundamentally different understandings of conciliarity? This is what we will discuss today. But maybe first I would like to ask Sebastian to tell some words about the new collective monograph straightly connected with the main topic of our seminars. Please, Sebastian, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me. I will share my screen. And then I will say a few words about the new publications. First of all, what I am talking about today will be mostly in this book, my own book on Orthodox Christian Identity in Western Europe, Contesting Religious Authority, and I will post a link to that book in the chat. The other book that I was asked to introduce is this book, the Pan-Orthodox Council of 2016, a new era for the Orthodox Church, where we have spoken with an interdisciplinary approach. Theologians, historians, political science, and religious studies have come together and have discussed this Council of 2016 from various angles. And we have four of the contributors with us today. That's Andrey Shishkov, Daniela Kakandieva, and Paul Valliere, and myself included as well. And I will post a link about that as well in chat now, if I manage. No, it doesn't work. A moment. Here. So that's the books in the chat, and I look forward to discussing this topic with you today. As Andrey already said, in the middle of December 2018, there was the talk about the Reunification Council for Ukraine, And at the same time, the Patriarchal Synod of Constantinople had decided to abolish the Archdiocese of Russian Orthodox parishes in Western Europe, Exarchate of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which was based in Paris. And when I, in the future of this, in the following, when I talk about the Exarchate, I mean this entity, which is not always an Exarchate throughout its history. And the abolishment of the Exarchate was the culmination of a very, very, very long process, just like the Pan-Orthodox Council, which also was a very long process that culminated in 2016. And this Exarchate started in the 1920s. And I will try to analyze the history of the Exarchate with a focus on Sobornost. And when I say Sobornost, I'm not talking about a very strictly theologically defined concept. So I will talk about Sobornost, synodality, or conciliarity, and I'll just mix up with these, and I will not use. Please do not ask me what the difference is between them. Say it like that. The Exarchate was born when Metropolitan Yevlogy Georgievsky of Western Europe was the official Metropolitan of Western Europe of the Moscow Patriarchate, and he switched in 1931 from the jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate to that one of the Constantinople Patriarchate. And this was, in my opinion, also due to a specific understanding of the implementation of how to implement the 1917 Moscow Council, Savoy. He did not agree with the way the Soviet-controlled Moscow Patriarchate understood this synodality, and also not with the way the ROKOR understood it, the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. And he did not want to become independent, or autocephalous like the Americans, because he said that's not the kind of synodality that we are striving to achieve. He split with the ROKOR, with the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, already in 1927, and split with Moscow in 1931 after a concrete event, namely an ecumenical prayer event in London, which was organized by the Anglican Church to pray for the persecuted Christians in the Soviet Union. And the patriarchal locum tenens Sergei said he was supposed to excuse himself for that, because the church in Moscow is not, in Russia, is not persecuted. But he said, I cannot do that. And therefore he had to find another way. And he subordinated himself to Constantinople. And that was a temporary subordination. The Tomos from Constantinople did not specify exactly what, when this temporary solution was to be lifted, but it said it was temporary. In the future, in the following, I will talk about 6 periods of the Exarchate throughout history, and in between each of these periods, there is a transition. What we have in period number 6, 2018 till today, it could be a transition. I don't know yet. It's too early to tell. So let's start. In the first period, from 1931 to 1945, the Exarchate was headed by Metropolitan Yevlogy himself. And he was a charismatic leader who managed to keep this flock together, mainly Russian emigres in France and some individual parishes elsewhere, like in Norway or in Belgium or in Germany or some as well. At the same time, the center of this entity was the Saint-Serge, the Institut de Théologie Orthodoxe Saint-Serge in Paris, which you can see on the photo here. If you look on the stairs on the left, you can see me as well on top there. This institute was founded already in 1926, and it was a beacon of free Orthodox theology. It was the only Orthodox theological institute outside of the traditionally Orthodox countries, and in this institute, especially then after 1931, but only after 1931, the teachers, which included famous people like John Meyendorff, and Sergei Schwemann, Alexander? No, I don't remember his first name. But anyway, these people, they laid the theoretical foundations of that which later became the theory of the Ecumenical Patriarchate as the keeper of the diaspora, which was something that the Ecumenical Patriarchate had only rudimentary understood until then. And the teachers were also massively involved in the budding ecumenical movement. So with the Anglicans and the Lutherans, they had a big dialogue. And throughout this period, a kind of open conciliarity thrived, which meant that they were open to the world. They wanted conciliarity, they wanted the Orthodox Church to show to the rest of the world, the Western European world, what the Orthodox Church was like, and not to isolate itself in any way. But obviously, one of the big questions is what happens when the leader dies or when the leader becomes incapacitated. And that happened in 1945. He didn't die yet, but the Moscow Patriarchate had been restored in 1943, and Metropolitan Yevlogy was euphoric about this restoration of the Moscow Patriarchate. So he returned to the Mother Church of Moscow. And Metropolitan Nikolai Yaroshevich of Krutitsa and Kolomna, he was dispatched from Moscow after the Second World War to Paris to solemnly accept the Exarchate back into the fold of the Mother Church. But this reunion was not openly communicated to the parishes, so they did not really know where they were. When Yevlogy died later on in 1946, there was the question of how to succeed him, and there were two successions. One was the Patriarch Sergei Stragorodsky from Moscow, who appointed Serafim Lukyanov, who you might know as the earlier Archbishop of Finland, as the new leader of the Exarchate, whereas Patriarch Photios of Constantinople, because the Exarchate asked him to do so, appointed Vladimir Tikhonitsky, who was the designated head, the designated successor of Metropolitan Yevlogy. He had been elected in a general assembly in the Exarchate. And this was basically the first split of the Exarchate, which split into a majority, an absolute majority, which followed Vladimir back to a Constantinople jurisdiction, and a tiny minority which remained in an Exarchate of the Moscow Patriarchate in Western Europe under Serafim. In the second period, under Archbishop Vladimir Tikhonitsky, the Exarchate continued to thrive and saw itself as the nucleus of an indigenous or a local Orthodox Church in Western Europe. The Institute Saint-Serge, the Orthodox Theological Institute, started to teach in French in the post-war years, and no longer in Russian. Until then, it had been all in Russian. And there were many organizations which were founded in this time. The RSHD, the Russian Student Christian Movement, started to call itself ACER, which is the French version of the Russian Christian Student Movement, and joined together with MJO, Mouvement de Jeunesse Orthodoxe, which is a Lebanese Orthodox youth organization, to form kind of a youth organization. And there was the Fraternité Orthodoxe d'Europe Occidentale, which was a lay organization for locals in Western Europe who wanted to be Orthodox, because it was difficult to, because the parishes were far between. Also, we have the Église catholique orthodoxe de France, which is a Western Rite Orthodox church. It has a complicated history, so I will just skip that here. 65, we have the second transition. No, we still have some more from period 2. Successor in 1960 was Georges Tarasov, and Georges Tarasov was the first bishop of the Exarchate who did not have his clerical education and clerical background and bishop's ordination in the Russian context, who had been ordained a bishop in diaspora. So he was the first purely diaspora bishop, so to speak. And 1965, Constantinople Synod released the Exarchate suddenly from its jurisdiction, expecting it to rejoin the Moscow jurisdiction. It did not. They did that because of two reasons. One of them was Moscow pressure. Moscow Patriarchate had regained its status in the Orthodox world, and the ongoing discussions about the Pan-Orthodox Council, Pan-Orthodox process, had in the course of the Pan-Orthodox process, Constantinople had Moscow had pressured Constantinople to give the Exarchate back to Moscow again. And another reason was that Constantinople, in that time, in the 1960s, early 1960s, started to reorganize its structures. It had, before then, it had one metropolitan for all of Western Europe, which was the Theatre metropolitan in London. And in the 1960s, they started to have different territorial metropolitanates or metropolises in which they organized their Greek diaspora. And so the Exarchate did not fit into this structure anymore. So we have 1965 released from the Constantinople jurisdiction. But Exarchate synodality, the specific kind of synodality that had developed within the Exarchate, did not allow for the bishop to make an executive decision to switch to Moscow. So they had an extraordinary General Assembly in 1966, where there were vivid discussions about what to do with the future. And the discussions ended in the fact that they did not join the Moscow Patriarchate. Instead, they declared the Exarchate independent, and not as an Exarchate, because an independent is and as the Orthodox Archdiocese of France and Western Europe, and the churches of the Russian diaspora in Western Europe. And together with this independence declaration, they promulgated new statutes. Before then, they had statutes which were not very clearly, not very comprehensive, but this had very liberal statutes where massive lay participation. Basically, they had only 1 or 2 or 3 bishops, mostly. So the bishops could not kind of make the decisions on their own, but the lay people were always involved at all levels. And the 1966 General Assembly had a spirit of optimism. Alexei Knasev, one of the most famous participants of this, said that we have transcended the stage of a diaspora church, and the Archdiocese is now the beginning of a legitimate local Orthodox church. But in the following years, this spirit of optimism receded, went back, and Bishop George Tarasov asked to be reintegrated into the Constantinople jurisdiction in 1971 again. And this was, on the one hand, a reaction to the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church in America in 1970. On the other hand, obviously, that they feared to be isolated in the Orthodox world, the Exarchate leaders. And Constantinople accepted this because now Constantinople was able to renegotiate the status of the Exarchate. Before, it had been an Exarchate and the Tomos had been set, so they couldn't really kind of change this relationship with Constantinople. So what happened in 1971 is they have a new situation, no longer as an Exarchate, but legally the Archdiocese was an episcopal vicariate, like an auxiliary bishopric to the Greek Metropolitan of France, which was a very new situation. But that was only the legal situation. And this was a strange legal situation because the Exarchate had parishes outside of France as well. So the parish in Norway, for example, was still officially part of a structure as a vicariate to the Metropolitan of France. This is strange. And even though it had this strange situation, it tried to live by its 1966 statutes as much as it could, even though these had been officially not accepted by Constantinople. So inside the Exarchate, there was still a vibrant lay activity and vibrant parish life. And you had people like this person who you see here to the right, that's Olivier Clément, one of the theologians, one of the main theologians of this period. He was a lay French convert. So that's, yeah. And he and others tried to be heard in the Pan-Orthodox process, which did not really work because they didn't listen to these voices because they were not from the official Orthodox churches, but from the diaspora. And they only kind of, the ideas that they promoted did come into the discussion, but not from them. They kind of went through the back door. In the 1990s, we have a new geopolitical situation where a lot of new migrants from the Orthodox countries come to Western Europe. These are free migrants in the sense that they are not persecuted, and they are not against the political system of their homeland, but they come because of economic opportunities and social opportunities. And this is a great challenge to the Diocese of Surosh in the UK, to the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, which is dominant in Germany, and to the Exarchate of the Archdiocese, which is the dominant structure of the Russian Orthodox Church in France. So this bishop is the Bishop Sergei Konovalov. He was the Archbishop of the Archdiocese from 1983, and he was from an emigrant Russian family in Belgium, after the bishop before him had been a German convert. So he was more Russian friendly, basically. He initiated the discussion of new statutes that were adopted by a General Assembly in 1998. And these new statutes basically laid down practices that had been in practice for the last 40 years or 30 years, and put them into a legal document, legalized participation of lay people as well. And he initiated a new Tomos from Constantinople. He said it's untenable that we, as an self-understood exarchate, are a vicariate to the Greek metropolitan in France. So we need back to exarchate status, and he managed to get this status back. So it was from 1998. There was a new Tomos in 1999, which renamed the structure an exarchate. And he initiated, thirdly, a discussion about the future of the exarchate, because he, in principle, wanted this anomaly to end. He wanted the Russian Orthodox Church in Western Europe to be united again. And this discussion drew criticism from several corners of the exarchate, because there were lots of people in the exarchate who did not want to rapproche or to approach Moscow again. The next transition is from 1998 to 2003, and this is first the criticism of this new Tomos. This criticism was not open. It has come to light only 10 years later, because apparently the exarchate had prepared the text of the Tomos, and then when the Tomos came, the text had been changed in crucial points, which they did not realize at the time that they were so crucial, but they found out later. And there was the fear that Constantinople, with this new Tomos, could actually be more heavy-handed on the exarchate than it was before, because earlier it was part of the Metropolitanate of France, so the Metropolitan of France had to say. Now it was directly subordinated to the Patriarchate, and the Patriarch could now kind of rule the exarchate much easier. And for the other side, those who wanted rapprochement with Moscow, the new Tomos precluded this rapprochement. It said very clearly that it was a structure of the Constantinople Patriarchate, and no longer had this temporality which it had before. At the same time, Archbishop Serge initiated a secret dialogue with Moscow, one that is not yet comprehensively researched, and it's very difficult to say what actually happened because the two sides say different things. But he definitely met with the Metropolitan Kirill Kundyayev, who's now the Patriarch of Moscow, then was the head of the Department of External Church Relations of the Moscow Patriarchate. He met with him in 2001, and they discussed something, but nobody really knows what exactly was discussed in this meeting. And this division between the exarchate, between those who were pro-Moscow and those who were anti-Moscow, kind of grew. The commission that he initiated on the future of the exarchate had its final report in 2002, which said that the goal of the exarchate is to become autocephalous, or at least autonomous as a church, as a local Orthodox Church of Western Europe. And there are two options to do this. Either we try to stay with Constantinople and do it within Constantinople, or we rejoin Moscow and become autonomous from there on. And this was the split. So I will make a bit quicker because I'm told I will not to talk too long. So I will go on and say just that 2003, Patriarch Alexei II of Moscow, who is pictured here left, issued a letter to the Orthodox diaspora structures in Western Europe, which said, let's just join together and you all come to the Moscow Patriarchate together, the Rokor, the Exarchate and the Surosh diocese, we all come together to Moscow and we have a new metropolitan structure, which is headed by Metropolitan Anthony of Surosh. The problem with this letter was, first, Anthony didn't know anything about it. Second, the Exarchate had just lost its bishop, so it didn't actually have a head bishop at the moment. And the Rokor was also surprised it had its own problems at the moment. So there was no official reaction to this letter. There were a lot of discussions. And Metropolitan Anthony, he died later on that year anyway. So, the idea did not continue. The criticism from the Exarchate was that this was what the late Archbishop Serge actually had been proposing to Moscow, and now Moscow had taken it in its own hands and had just kind of trying to run with it, and they didn't like that. So they had a new archbishop which headed the Exarchate. This is Gabriel de Wilder. Gabriel de Wilder is on the bottom here, and you can the bottommost picture, and you can see from his appearance alone, he is not a traditional Russian bishop. He does not look like many of the other Russian bishops that we had in the Exarchate in the years before. He is a Dutch convert. He did not know Russian language, which was very bad because he always relied on translators and advisors. And his advisors belonged mostly to the anti-Moscow faction of the Exarchate. So he was not following up the steps that his predecessor had taken to come closer to the Moscow Patriarchate. So there were aggressive attempts for Moscow to seize church property, and top picture here is Nice on the south coast, and in the middle you have the Russian Orthodox Cultural Center in Paris, which is a government-funded center, a Russian government-funded center with an Orthodox Church integrated. And also in the 2000s, we had the big Surosh crisis, which was the crisis over how to continue the Diocese of Surosh after Metropolitan Anthony had passed away. But I'll skip that and just say that Archbishop Gabriel, who was the head of the Exarchate, he stepped down in January 2013, incidentally 2 weeks before Pope Benedict stepped down, but that's a different story. And went into retirement. He said, "I cannot do this anymore. I'm gone." And he left the Exarchate. And now we had a problem, namely, for the first time in the history of the Exarchate, there was no designated successor to the Archbishop. Because earlier there had always been an auxiliary bishop who had been ready to take over once the Archbishop passed away. But this time there was no such auxiliary bishop available. So first of all, they had to select a candidate for the episcopacy, and second, they had to have him duly consecrated. And there were lots of discussions of how to do this. Because also there were no obvious and suitable candidates. There is many of those people that could have become bishops had already defected, had passed over to Moscow jurisdiction, like Metropolitan Sava Tutonov, who is now an influential bishop in the Russian Orthodox Church. There were not so many other people that could become bishops because the monastic tradition within the Exarchate is rather weak. So there were not many monks that were able to become bishops. Moreover, the exact procedures on how to select a new bishop had never been used, had never been needed in the statutes, and the statutes were new anyway. So they had to kind of work out what exactly the statutes said about this, getting a new bishop. Step one was in the statutes. Step one, the General Assembly of the Exarchate proposes a list of 3 candidates, which are then approved by the Constantinople Synod. And step 2 is the General Assembly elects one of the 3 candidates that is then canonically elected and consecrated in Constantinople. So basically, we need 2 General Assemblies. In normal times, that's possible because you can have bishops. You can wait a year before a bishop is consecrated. But at this time, it was important that the bishop is consecrated at the moment, as soon as possible. And the General Assembly of 30th March 2013 failed to yield any solution. They did not find any suitable solution. So they invited to a new General Assembly in early November 2013. And there we had a list of 3 candidates which they were approved in the morning of the Saturday. It was Job Getscha was one of them, Canadian-Ukrainian specialist in liturgical theology, a professor of St. Serge, and Grigorios Papatomas, who we see here left. He became bishop last week, so he finally achieved that, which is very good. Axios. He's a French-Greek canon law specialist and a professor at St. Serge at the time. And the third candidate was Simeon Kosek, a French monk, who had switched from the Moscow jurisdiction to the Exarchate in 2007. And strictly speaking, none of the 3 were eligible to the episcopacy because the statutes said that they had to be members of the Patriarchate of the Exarchate for 5 years minimum. And only Simeon Kosek fulfilled that requirement, but he was not the preferred candidate. So they decided to change the statutes before they actually made this list. So they had one General Assembly which first changed the statutes, then approved this list, and then if they faxed this list to Constantinople, where a parallel synod session took place at the same time. After 5 hours of waiting, the reply from Constantinople arrived, namely, we have approved the following 3 candidates: Job Getscha, who you see here on the right, Mikhailo Anishenko, and Bessarion Komzias. 2 names which were not on the original list and which had never played any role in the Exarchate before, so nobody knew them, which made it clear that obviously Job Getscha was duly elected, but there were outcries of trickery and betrayal that Constantinople had betrayed the Exarchate because they had not approved the list as they were supposed to do, but had sent a new list. And they argued that the traditional conciliarity of the Exarchate has been undermined. Now, Archbishop Job, who is a very good theologian, proved to be not such a good administrator and archpastor. He relied on very anti-Moscow advisors, and he was criticized as being a difficult personality, being unattentive, not listening to people, being pedantic, like akribeia instead of economia, and being a rather abstract person. And he was also criticized because he disciplined numerous priests who dared to criticize him. If you said anything that could be presented as criticism of the archbishop, he disciplined you, even to the point of defrocking, of trying to defrock you. This engendered fierce public debates on the internet, numerous letters complaining to the Constantinople Patriarchate and petitioning for a new bishop, and obviously the opponents, the people that had been pro-Moscow all the way or had already moved to Moscow jurisdiction, said, well, we told you so, so you cannot criticize us now anymore. Just come to Moscow. And we see here on the left, we see a video which circulated on the internet with Archbishop Job from 2015, where he tries to explain to the parishioners that the only power in the Exarchate is me, and if you do not go through me, then you are not part of the Exarchate. That's basically what he said here. The same video or a different video appeared as well, which just before this incident, where the archbishop seems to be escorted out of the cathedral by what looks like muscular bodyguard, which are assumed to be from Moldova. So it's a strange situation. It was a very strange situation in the fall of 2015. Shortly after this video appeared, Job was quietly promoted to be the representative of the Constantinople Patriarchate at the international organizations in Geneva, Switzerland, where he is very well taken care of. Basically, that's a very good position for him, and he does very well there. He has also later had an important role in the panels of council. He was one of the people that had the daily press briefings, and also in the Ukrainian autocephaly he has played an important role. He's a very important person in the Orthodox Church of Constantinople. And when once Archbishop Job had left, the Bishop Jean Renetot, who you also mentioned, Andrey, who is pictured here on the right, took over the exarchate and was duly elected as the new archbishop. And he's a very quiet and calm and peaceful man. So the waves calmed down, basically. Coming to the last point, in end of November 2018, the Synod of Constantinople suddenly announced the decision to dissolve the exarchate for pastoral reasons, as they said. They were probably afraid that there would be a schism, or that the Moscow Patriarchate would not accept the Ukrainian Church, and therefore that they would release the exarchate to be free to move to wherever they wanted to. The options were either you move to a different jurisdiction, or you integrate yourself in the local Greek structures of excuse me, of the different regions where you are. This decision surprised everyone, and Metropolitan Emmanuel Adamakis, who took over as locum tenens of the exarchate, because Bishop Jean was no longer officially the bishop there, was no longer a bishop of the Constantinople Patriarchate. Basically, he's a controversial person, but I will not say anything about that. 93%, but again, just like in 1965, the exarchate held a new general assembly, and 93% of the delegates at the assembly voted against the dissolution, which is basically a problem, because if the Patriarchate of Constantinople says you are dissolved, and they say no, we're not dissolved, what happens then? What is next? And therefore, basically, you had a fierce public debate, and I will be quick now because, yeah. And the options were to join Moscow or not join Moscow. At next General Assembly in September 2019, 58% voted to join Moscow, which would be enough if it was simple majority, but opponents argued that the statutes require a 2/3 majority to switch jurisdiction, so they did not accept this 58% majority. And the public debate continued until Archbishop Jean, who we see here right next to Patriarch Kirill, received a gramota from Patriarch Kirill to be integrated into the structures of the Moscow Patriarchate, but not integrated in the structure, but as an autonomous exarchate, just analogous to the ROKOR, the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. The remaining parishes of the Patriarchate, of the exarchate, which did not join Moscow, joined various other jurisdictions, and you can see here on this image, you can see where they all went to very different jurisdictions. I can say more about that, but I will not. I'll make a conclusion. The Paris Exarchate was an experiment in conciliarity and Sobornost. It was an attempt to fulfill the spirit of the 1917-1918 Moscow Sabor. There were positive and optimistic periods of its development, but these were interchanged with negative and pessimistic ones. So it was up and down. Sometimes they were living this conciliarity, and sometimes they were not allowed to live it. Especially the revitalization of the autocephalous church in the 1990s challenged this exarchate vision of conciliarity. Both patriarchates, both Moscow and Constantinople, eventually saw the exarchate as a threat to their own vision of how the Orthodox Church was to be organized and was to be run. Moscow wanted to regain influence over all of the Russian diaspora, whereas Constantinople wanted to get rid of this structure which is defying all canonical clarity. It was an ambiguous structure. So basically, the downfall of the Exarchate was the unwillingness to submit to the metropolitan principle of authority. And the metropolitan principle of authority is from the contribution of Paul Valliere in the book I mentioned in the beginning on the Pan-Orthodox Council. So if you want to know more about that, we can discuss that as well. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sebastian, for the interesting overview of the situation around the Paris Exarchate. I'm sure that the participants of our seminar have many questions, and let's start the discussion. We have a first question from Natalia Vasilievich. Please, Natalia.
Yeah, hello everyone. I want to continue the story a little bit because also what happened due to shift of Metropolitan Jean to Moscow Patriarchate is that now in the Moscow Patriarchate we have a bishop who is the father of the Council of the Holy and Great Council at Crete 2016. So by this, the Moscow Patriarchate also can have some participants of the Council of Crete, and it helps conciliarity, I believe.
Thank you. Very good point. I had never thought about that. But was Jean at the council in 2016?
Yes, he was one of members of delegation of Patriarchate of Constantinople. So yes, he was. I saw him there.
Thank you for this point, this comment.
Thank you. I would like to ask and to hear a little more about the principles of synodality that, as you say, were undermined in 2013. How was the Exarchate governed? What is a specific which rather different from other churches?
The Exarchate, as I said, it had a long history of being independent, basically being independent from patriarchal oversight, from the Exarchate deemed itself to be a self-contained structure where the bishop was selected from within the Exarchate, and then it was just accepted from the Patriarchate. That was the main difference, whereas both Constantinople and Moscow see this procedure a little bit differently, that the bishop is not selected from within the structure by the lay participants, by the lay members of a structure of a diocese, but are kind of imposed from above with participation of the diocese, the member of the diocese, but they do not have the final say, which the Exarchate assumed that it would still have the final say. That was, I think, that is the main difference. They assume that the democratic principles, as they are carried out in Western European societies, that they also work in the church, which they don't always, possibly for good reasons.
Thank you. The next question I see will be the question of Paul Valliere and then Daniela.
Sebastian, thank you so much for that presentation. It is so relevant to our theme. You know, I'm familiar with this history only in a kind of general way, and to have such a precise analysis of it is extremely helpful, and it really highlights the issues of conciliarity that are at the center of our discussion. One technical question: what is, in French and in Russian, the term for what you are calling the General Assembly?
It's Assemblée Générale. in French.
Okay.
In Russian, I'm not sure what it is, but it is basically
I'm looking for Sobor, you know, somewhere.
Yeah, Sobor. I think they assume it to be Sobor, but Sobor has taken on a different meaning in the modern Russian Orthodox understanding of it, of course, because mainly the bishops, yeah. It basically it's born out of the fact of being an association under French law, a religious association under French law, and they are then required to have annual, or not annual, but regular general assemblies. And the problem with the Exarchate, one of the other problems, which a second answer to Andrey's question, is that the Exarchate, many of the Exarchate's members see themselves as part of an association under French law, and not as part of a diocese under canon law. So basically, they assume, or they argue, that what happens happens within the Exarchate happens so because of the statutes, not because of the canons of the Orthodox Church. Which is kind of a conflict between the two. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you for that.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. Then Danila, please, your question.
So thank you, Sebastian, for this very intriguing and concise overview of the history of the Exarchate. So I want first of all to say some comment concerning this democratic principle, because just I made some association with the Bulgarian church history during the 19th century, when Bulgarians used to elect their bishops, and also, as I know, not only in Bulgaria, but also in Austro-Hungary, there was in the Orthodox Church, they had accepted this principle of lay participation in the elections of bishops, which, as I know, wasn't the case in Russia. And the other, which is also very interesting, is that there was also the principle of rotation. So when they created kind of eparchial councils at the metropolitan or at the synod, some kind of bodies, they had also this principle of rotation of the heads of this council. So this is which wasn't in Russia. So I'm curious how this historical experience influences the decisions or the behavior of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. Maybe this is one of the reasons of the different approaches, not only the parallels between how the Western society is organized and how Eastern societies are organized. And my question is about, I would like to ask you to draw some parallels or to discuss a little bit the case of Orthodox churches in North America, diaspora Orthodox churches, and the Russian diaspora churches, and those in Europe. It seems to me that in Europe, the Russian Orthodox churches, immigrant churches, weren't so stable like in America, in North America. I mean, there we have the Orthodox Church in America, ROCOR. So, and my question is, to what degree this greater stability of Russian Orthodox churches in North America in comparison with Europe is a result of conciliarity, or it is a result of something else, like political situation and so on. So maybe just to have these parallels.
Yeah. My impression is that the Russian structures are bigger, and because they are bigger and have more bishops, more parishes, they are easier to they have more stability, basically. And the second thing is that America is a freer country where you can organize freer than in Europe. In Europe, there are always rules how to regulate a religious organization. In France, less than in others, but still there as well. And I think that also plays into that. Yes, but it's.
So
I don't completely agree with you that the American state structures are more stable. They are just as volatile, but it doesn't look that way because they have much more people. So they are bigger, so it kind of dissipates.
So it's not so much a result of conciliarity. I mean, this difference.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Thank you.
Thank you. A forest of hands. Father Andrey Loud, please, your question.
I actually got so many questions now after those exchanges, but what I was wanting to raise is a point that Sebastian made not very long ago. He talked about the situation in France as being some sort of tension between a religious organization in France that is governed by basically state law, and the alternative being a religious situation, an Orthodox situation governed by canon law. But I think both of these are, well, to start off with, just what is meant by governed by canon law. Canon law doesn't envisage, the canons give up in about the 8th century. They envisage a situation of basically the East Roman Empire. It's not at all clear how you reapply these in what we call the diaspora, which itself is a very clear notion if you're thinking in terms of outside the Byzantine Empire, but it's a very unclear notion if what you mean is outside the geographical boundaries of the traditional Orthodox churches. I think it seems to me that there are two ways in which we can look at things, and in some ways we have to look at them from both perspectives, because the churches in France have to be legal, have to obey French law, and I think that we bang on about the canons, but in fact we use the canons extremely selectively to support whatever position that we want to have. And just the other thought that, sorry, I've got lots of questions. The other point, the bit that you passed over very quickly about what happened to the churches that didn't go with John Chariopoulos to Moscow. And you had your nice map with lots of colors which were not explained. But I only know, I knew the situation in a few cases, and my impression is, and this may not be right at all, that in fact, in many cases, what happened is not really to do with the big picture, it's to do with the little picture.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the situation in Norway, for instance, John of Chariopoulos didn't behave, John of insisted that the church in Oslo revise its laws in accordance with what he thought was canonical in a way which had been illegal in terms of the Norwegian church and in terms of Norway. And it was that particular, it was the unraveling of that which led the Oslo church to, which had been in part of the Exarchate, to go where it is now under the Serbs. And that was facilitated by the abolition of the Exarchate in 2018, because as there was no Exarchate, there was no problem about letters of release for the clergy involved. But it seems to me it's a very particular sort of problem, which may illustrate some of the problems of the dissolution of the Exarchate, but doesn't seem to me to be part. Yeah, it's more complicated than saying some others went somewhere else. Yes,
that's right. There are some cases which are very specific, like the Norwegian case, which is extremely specific. I can tell you a lot more about that, but I will not, because I'm Norwegian myself, so that's why I'm kind of involved in that case as well. And that was even before the dissolution of the Exarchate. And there are some of these that went to Rokor. I don't know if you saw that, but a couple of parishes went to Rokor. They also went mostly before the official dissolution in November 2018. The others, I mean, the two big groups are the ones that went with John of Chariopolis to Moscow, and the ones that integrated into the local Greek structures. Like the majority of the British parishes, for example, the formerly Sobornost parishes that had been in the Exarchate for a while, most of them went with the Greek metropolitan and are a deanery under the Greek metropolitan at the moment. And also in Germany, they were all, the three parishes were there. They went to the Greek metropolitan. And then the Swedish and Danish case, they went to the Bulgarian Orthodox Archdiocese in North America, which is a very strange case, a very specific case again. So it's true, but they were very different. And in most of the cases, you have to look at the parish itself and the priests of the parish in order to understand why they went this way or that way.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your paper, which was really very illuminating.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next will be Natalia Vasilevich and then Father Andrey.
Yeah, I would like to comment the last sentence. It depends on the priest. It's not about conciliarity, sorry. Yeah, if we speak about that parishes chose this or that direction because of the position of the priest, then probably on the level of diocese, we can speak of more horizontal structures, but on the level of parish, we cannot do it. That was small comment. Second comment, I would like to say that this dependence on how the church life or activities of religious organizations are regulated in according to the secular law. It's not only the case of France and how the church is organized. And so this tension between the canon law and the legal regulations existing in the country, it's just a case of every church. And we can, for example, like in Russia, yes, the Patriarchate was abolished. It was a synodal system because it was a decision of government. And then Patriarchate was reinstalled also because the laws changed in Russia. Also, like many in Romania, for example, it reminds me also discussion at Vatopedi meeting when bishops were discussing if it's according to canon law to elect bishops. But that lay people are participating in election of patriarch or of bishops, and then Romanians delegates say, sorry, but in our country it's just a constitution. It requires that there is an assembly which participates, so we cannot discuss if it's following the canon law or it's against the canon law, because we cannot change constitution. It's how it works in the country. So I think that also when we speak about the problem of Exarchate, it's not only the problem, the tension between French secular law and so canon law of Orthodox Church, but also because Exarchate was operating, archdiocese or whatever was operating in very different countries with very different legal systems. And the center was somehow in France, but the parishes were operating in Germany, which is one completely different systems than in France, in Belgium, in UK, and so on. And I think that it's also created a tension between the association in France and the parishes operating outside of France. And moreover, on the level of canon relationships, Archbishop was part of bishops' assemblies of different countries. And it also made a lot of tensions because he couldn't participate in the assembly of Germany, in the assembly of Belgium, which are very vivid assemblies, at least from my knowledge. But he was more, how to say, oriented to France and to assembly of bishops' assembly of France. And it's not also not a situation in which it could operate equally as a pan-European structure of like ecclesial structure, which could, like, there was a lot of problems in the structure of the exarchate on legal level, on canon level, and so on. So that's what I wanted to comment.
Thank you. To the last comment on the bishops' conferences, well, that's exactly the same problem with Metropolitan Joseph of the Romanian Church, for example. He is also the metropolitan for all of Western Europe. So he's in the Bishop Conference of Spain, France, and Benelux, or should be, and Switzerland maybe too as well. I don't know exactly. So it's not a specific, that's part that a bishop has to be member of more than one bishop conference. This is not a specific exarchate problem. But you are absolutely right that these tensions between the different legal systems within the exarchate and the tensions between the legal system and the canonical law in general is a general problem. One more point I wanted to say. Yes, you said that it's the priest's decision, is not conciliarity. I was not saying that the dissolution of the exarchate was as an exercise of conciliarity. I was saying that the exarchate itself was an exercise of conciliarity, which unfortunately failed in the end. How this will continue, whether this conciliarity will continue to live on in the Moscow structure of the exarchate which survived, is very difficult to say. But the other parts of the exarchate are unfortunately dispersed and no longer able to live this kind of conciliarity on their own, but must rely on the different structures in which they are integrated, which are not as used to conciliarity as they were. So it's impossible to say now what will happen, but it will be interesting.
Thank you. The next question from Father Andrey.
Sebastian, thank you for your brilliant and well-structured paper and presentation. And in your summary, you say that exarchate was an experiment of the conciliarity and the both patriarchates. So exarchate as a threat to their own vision and interests. But could we say, in using example of dynamic of history of exarchate, that attempts of the establishment and the constructing of the base on the basis of Orthodox diaspora local church with its bishop conference, for example, in France, which is not related to any specific jurisdiction and nationality, was also failed. It's quite a complicated thing in Orthodox churches. That's my question. Thank you.
Sorry, there was one word I did not understand because the connection broke. One of the last words, which is very important.
Yes, that it was failed, the establishing of the local Orthodox Church. The basic question, it was failed in France or no?
Oh, okay. I would say that they went a long way. They managed to establish something that looked like an local Orthodox church in France. The problem was that the outsiders always wanted to have a say. And for example, in the 60s and 70s, the Orthodox Church in France was left very much alone. They could basically do what they wanted. They were not, 60s, 70s after, but that's not really true. The patriarchates tried to kind of use them as a pawn, as an asset, or as a liability, whatever. So that was the problem in the 60s and 70s. And the 80s, they basically had their own way of dealing with things and were left alone. But then in the 90s, they came all these new immigrants who had a different vision of the Orthodox Church, which it was not the same vision as they had cultivated over the last 50 years. So in principle, the experiment failed. Yes, the experiment of creating a local Orthodox Church for France failed, but not because the local Orthodox Church was not able to do it. It was because of outside influences that always came at the wrong moments. That's my impression.
Thank you. The next question, Irina.
Yes, Sebastian, thank you very, very much for your presentation, because now we can see the evolution, and I think what you said about the 60s and 70s is quite important. And of course, it's not just the presence of new migrants that came later, but also the generational change. So that's something.
Yeah.
And also, as you've pointed out, the kind of impact of Western converts to Orthodoxy, like Olivier Clément and others who, didn't have this background. But I think, there are lots of things that, of course, need to be clarified. And one is, in my view, is the criteria of what constitutes membership in these conciliar organs. And I think perhaps it's another conversation, but it would be important to look at the parish statutes and what is the role of parishioners in parish life, and how people are elected in these assemblies. So it's just that we don't really know much, but we know that the presence of laity is very strong, but then how the people are elected, what kind of criteria and rights they have, but that's again, maybe too big question for to be discussed today. But what I was thinking is that you kind of identify conciliarity with the role of the laity in these church organs, which is correct, and I think it's one aspect of conciliarity and maybe not the only one. So I think we need to kind of maybe clarify what kind of definition of conciliarity, maybe self-definition of conciliarity, the Paris Exarchate people have. Like you mentioned the legacy, well, for example, you mentioned the legacy of the Sobor Moscow Council of 1917, but I wonder to what extent this was actually articulated in these very, crucial meetings. Did people themselves refer to this council? Did they speak about conciliarity? So what was their vision of the church? I mean, so could we reconstruct it, and like, was it kind of clearly formulated? One example you actually mentioned, how they changed the statutes just to create a possibility for some of these bishops being elected. I mean, to me, it doesn't seem to be a very kind of conciliar practice. So it's just something that needed to be done ad hoc, and maybe, in the pressure, under the pressure of the moment. So I think it's very, very, very messy, to put it simply, how these different legal, canonical, human and other principles are just being connected. And of course, we can see some kind of tendency, and we can say, yes, that was very unique structure, that was very unique experience, and now it's kind of in a crisis. But maybe, we if it was unique, maybe we need to kind of understand better, like what kind of church conciliarity this experience is showing. And also the parallels with North American case would be quite appropriate, as some of the discussant pointed out. And in the 60s in America, especially, this very famous case of so-called the riot of laity in San Francisco in 1961. And some of this, laity, they went into the civil courts in order to achieve the decisions they wanted concerning the building of this cathedral, and Bishop Jan Maximovich to be elected. So I think there were many interesting parallels there, and the way the Russian Church abroad reacted could also be seen as, some attempt to kind of put curbs into this activity of the laity. But well, I think what I wanted to ask, maybe just two things is like, yeah, do you identify conciliarity with this activity of the laity, and is that really the only thing about conciliarity, and whether they had some kind of reflection on the legacy of Sobor and this kind of theological understanding of conciliarity? Sorry, I probably spoke too much. Yeah.
Thank you. I would say then, in that sense, you have to see different versions of conciliarity. I focused on the conciliarity as laity participation here. Yes, if you look at the other layers of conciliarity, you can look, for example, at the ecumenical movement. The Orthodox Christians in Western Europe around Metropolitan Yevlogi had a very clear vision of the ecumenical movement. The ecumenical movement, we need to show the world how the Orthodox Church is a conciliar and a theologically sound community, and then the others will come to us. That didn't happen, of course, but that was kind of their image of what it would be like. So Metropolitan Yevlogi was very clear that he wanted to have a church in France, in Western Europe, which was conciliar, in the sense that it was open to everybody, and everybody was kind of partaking in it. And this means also that the ecumenical movement was a very important part of that. The reason why it looks messy to you and to me as well, which was the reason why I embarked in this study in the beginning at all, because I thought it looked so messy, so I wanted to kind of make structure into it. And the reason is, in my opinion, simply because they could not develop organically. They always had pressures from all sides, especially from the patriarchates in the later years, from both the Patriarchate of Moscow and the Patriarchate of Constantinople. Had pressures from them to kind of behave in a certain way, and they tried to kind of try to live their own life, to further live their own life, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't work, because it just didn't fit. And that was when they had to rewrite the statutes to make this list of bishop candidates eligible. That's one of those cases where you say, well, we want one of these three people. We know that, but we need to conform to the statutes. And in order to conform to the statutes, we need to we need to change statutes. That's one thing. And by that time, by 2013, the Exarchate had already been kind of the life force, much of the life force had been sucked out of it already by the ongoing legal ramifications of fighting with the Moscow Patriarchate over certain church structures in Nice, for example, and in Biarritz. That had already kind of taken its toll, and it's just like the Corona thing. It's now, you see, in the beginning we all said, okay, we just need to be careful and it will be fine again, but now we kind of start to get giddy and want to have change, want to have quicker change. You want to do something, and yeah, and that's the same thing that happened in the Exarchate, in my opinion.
Thank you, Sebastian. Second round of questions, and first will be Natalia Vasilevich, and then Father Andrey.
Yeah, I don't want again to ask a question. I just want to react about my experiences of the parish life of the Exarchate in the recent years. I was big fan of Exarchate. I wanted even to move to Paris to live this perfect ideal orthodoxy in my life, and but it was the least conciliar experience of my life going to parish of Rudaru, and I will just explain an example. Rudaru is not one parish. It was not one parish during the time of Exarchate. It was two parishes. They had different languages, different liturgical languages, different calendars, and different time when services was starting. So people were coming. Some were going up for one kind of service, others were going down. And it would be fine that they have different forms of liturgy, and then but still the same parish, but they were not the same parish. After liturgy, everyone has had coffee, and there is two parish houses, and everyone from the upstairs go to the right or to the left, I don't remember now exactly, and from downstairs go to the other side. They had different collections for coffee and tea and cookies, and so for me, it was like schizophrenia, because I was expecting the most communal and uniting experience, and I never, ever, wherever I've been in Orthodox Church, I didn't have this kind of separation in one parish. Second thing, from my experience also, it's the conciliarity was not working because of oligarchic in some, no, it's meritocratic, would better say, form of organization, because as you know, in this community of immigrations, there are big families of many priests, and they're married to each other, and so on. So that's very often the dynamic inside the community belongs to this family relationship. Who is married to whom? Who is divorced from whom? You know, when someone divorced, they can go to different jurisdiction. Whose children are revolting against the parents and also go to another jurisdiction because they have conflict with parents, and so on. So this dynamic of the whole church community was really much dependent on these private relationships inside the community, and also between other jurisdictions, because there were also this dynamic connected to Rokor, like some families, some were in Rokor and married with Exarchate, and they couldn't have communion together. So and so on. And now again, after the dissolution of Exarchate, it's again created a problem for many families, because those who stayed in the Patriarchate of Constantinople and Moscow Patriarchate, they don't have common communion together, because there is a interruption of communion from Moscow Patriarchate in relation to Constantinople Patriarchate, and so that also this probably this thing is the most painfully how to say, the people feel the most painful result of all this situation with the solution of Exarchate, that now there is this two jurisdictions which are fighting each other and which cannot have communion with each other. And if the dissolution would happen in other time, not in connection with the Orthodox Church in Ukraine and not in connection with interruption of communion, then probably the dynamic would be very different, because one of the biggest issue which was discussed during the assemblies, during preparations of the assemblies, was how can it be that we will not have communion anymore together? So I hope I contributed a little bit from my experience also. So the situation is very, very difficult, and even it's very, we cannot only speak about the structures, but we should also see personalities, concrete personalities, these families, and also this different type of dynamics which used to be also political, probably dynamics, that for some people politically was not possible to go to Moscow Patriarchate because of the politics of the Russian Federation now. So they didn't want to be associated with Moscow Patriarchate politically. It was also very big discussion among them about joining Moscow Patriarchate or not. Or some were choosing to go to Moscow Patriarchate only because of they liked the bishop. So just for personal affection to the bishop, they went with him. They didn't went to Moscow Patriarchate, they just went with the beloved bishop. They just followed him. Yes, and probably the last thing which I wanted to share with you, but I probably forgot. Then next round I join.
Thank you. Yes, the oligarchy structure. I mean, what I am referring, what I've been presenting is basically the public image, that the public voice, that the public voices that could be heard. And I know that a lot of these public voices are do not necessarily reflect the majority of the parishioners. So I'm aware of that, and I thank you for that comment.
Thank you, Sebastian, and thank you, Natalia, for this personal experience. Next question or comment, Father Andrey, please.
It's only a comment, really, but I think it just strikes me when you start to talk about laity. Many laity don't really have any very strong jurisdictional feelings at all. They go to the nearest church, and if it's Greek, it's Greek. If it's Russian, it's Russian. Or if it's Romanian, it's Romanian. I think this is a good thing. I think that at one level it's a good thing. It does also mean, though, I think, that the voice of the laity within the structures of the church is actually divided in a way which doesn't represent the truth of people's engagement with one another.
Yes, thank you. The only problem is that if you are a Romanian and you don't speak Greek, then you don't want to go to the Greek church, or you might not want to go to the Greek church, basically. And that's the problem. So that's why the parishes in the Exarchate tried to start using French and have a French or a Norwegian or a Danish or whatever language parish parallel to the one that was Russian originally. And this worked for many years, but the 1990s came and it kind of divided the parishes again.
That's only partly true. I mean, it seems to me that, for instance, in France, there are Russian parishes under the Moscow Patriarchate that have been used French since the 30s. In Paris, there's one at least that I know very well, where I usually go. And it's true in England that the churches that are not ethnic don't necessarily belong to any specific ethnic church. There are Greek churches that use a great deal of English. There are Russian churches that use a great deal of English. There are several Romanian churches that in principle use English in England. Yeah, so I mean, the ethnic division is it seems to me in some parts, at any rate, of Western Europe, the ethnic division is nothing like as great as it used to be.
Yeah, that's right. But the case which Natalia said about the two parishes in the Catholic Cathedral in Paris on the Rue de Rue, that's one case in point where you see that the ethnic tensions are bigger than ever. Yes. Or no longer now. It's maybe a different, completely different situation. I don't know. But thank you. So yes, it's different. You should look at the micro level. Yes. Be careful with overgeneralizations.
Thank you, Father Andrew. And next question, Alexei Barzov.
Thank you, Sebastian. I'm curious if it's possible to compare the policy of Constantinople toward the Exarchate and its policy toward the American Archdiocese, and were these policies coordinated with each other in any degree, for example? So did they depend on each other, the policy towards the American Archdiocese and the policy towards the Russian Exarchate?
Yes, I said that this decision in 1965 to release the Exarchate was part of the restructuring of the archdiocese, of the metropolises of the Greek of the Constantinople in Western Europe. So they wanted to divide this one structure that they had, the metropolis of Thyatira, which is in Great Britain, based in London, basically. They wanted to divide this up into different regional things. The regional metropolises in Western Europe, the Greek metropolises in Western Europe, are not organized in the same way as the archdiocese in America, which is a rather autonomous part, officially at least, autonomous part of the Constantinople Patriarchate, whereas the dioceses in Western Europe are more parts of they are not as autonomous as the American one, and they are not within the Greek parts of the metropolises of the Greek Church in Western Europe. There are not more divisions again. As you have the Metropolitan of Great Britain and Ireland, and he might have an auxiliary bishop, but he does not. He doesn't have the metropolis is not divided into different dioceses, basically, if I understand right. Yes, so I can't see very much. They are on very different levels, because the American Archdiocese of the Greek Church, Constantinople likes it, and they want to keep it, and they want to harvest money from it. The Exarchate was for all the years it was in existence. It was basically a liability, a problem for the Constantinople Patriarchate, if you see what I mean.
Thank you. We have been discussing for quite a long time, and so I guess we will confine ourselves to one or two more questions or comments. Natalia Vasilievich remembered her last question or comment.
Yes, no, I remembered also some information that now Metropolitan John starts, or Archbishop John starts to accept priests from Moscow Patriarchate who want to change jurisdiction and come from Moscow Patriarchate to the archdiocese under Moscow Patriarchate, which also creates tension inside Moscow Patriarchate, because no one wants priests to go to some other structure which were rather also has ad hoc character, although they try to present it as they keep the tradition of conciliarity and so on, but in reality it also creates a kind of alternative jurisdiction. And now when the Moscow Patriarchate priests start to run from the bishops to Archbishop John, I think after how to say, I don't know how if the structure will exist after the bishop will not be able to continue as a bishop due to his health reason, or I don't know, maybe yeah. So it's very much, how to say, very how do evaluate what does it mean now in Moscow Patriarchate, which status has this structure, if it is sustainable or not, and what are your prognosis on what could happen with the structure? Yeah, and also some comment about America. I think saying that Constantinople likes America, Archdiocese of America is very big one. It has its own statute, and Constantinople is very difficult to impose any decisions on the Archdiocese of America. Otherwise it's more easier that Archdiocese of America imposes decisions on Constantinople, but not vice versa. So of course they cannot dissolute it, because probably these archons of archons who have political power also in the United States will not be happy.
Thank you. Yes, about the priests going from Moscow to the Exarchate, I hadn't heard about that, but I know in Great Britain we had a group of Rokor priests who changed from Rokor to the Exarchate jurisdiction.
I mentioned Father Dmitry Sobolevsky from Düsseldorf.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, including Andrew Phillips, one of the most outspoken Orthodox converts in the English world of all, and the first Orthodox person I actually contacted in my life, which was 20 years ago. My prognosis for the future, it's very, very difficult, but I agree with you that it's a problem which has been the problem of the Exarchate since its inception. What to do when the Archbishop, the head of the ruling bishop, steps down or passes away? What to do then? And it will be interesting to see if Archbishop John will get an auxiliary in the next few years. If he does, then we can see a continuation of the structure. If he does not, then it is very, very unlikely that the structure will get a new bishop once Archbishop John passes away.
Hi.
Thank you. And the last question from Daniela, please.
I apologize, I cannot find my electronic hand. Anyway, so it's not so much question, but a suggestion, because while listening to Natalia, I think that maybe the issue of conciliarity could be approached at two levels. One is conciliarity within the Exarchate, and the other at the higher level within the context of Orthodox Church, and there it can be analyzed from the point of view of this struggle between Moscow and Constantinople. So such an approach at two levels could be very helpful to see the specificity of conciliarity, how it works.
Thank you. And please don't forget the micro level, the parish level, which is the one that Irina is arguing for. That's a third level, which you also. So we need to look at it at different levels, at the parish level, at the diocesan or structure level, and at the universal level of universal orthodoxy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alexei raised a hand, and if you very short.
Just a very short question. Is there any slightest sign of the interference of the local government in church affairs in the Exarchate? I mean, the French government or the municipal authorities in any city where the parishes are situated? Just slightest sign of interference.
I can refer back to you back to the Nice case on the French Mediterranean coast, which is a problem because you have the big cathedral, which has been in the care of the Exarchate for the last 100 years, but now is part of the Moscow Patriarchate because the Russian government managed to change the Russian government got involved and got the ownership of this cathedral, the property. And the problem there was, according to the Exarchate activists, at least, the problem was that the government, that the mayor of the city listened to Russian money, yeah, basically, and therefore was biased. And that's one thing. The other thing is in different countries, I know that there are different rules. So the Orthodox parishes which belong to the Exarchate need to conform to these rules, and sometimes these rules require more change, and sometimes they don't. In Scandinavia, they require more, for example, whereas in France they require very little, because in France the religion is not part of the political system. Religion is kind of, it's laity, it's laicity. So they don't. It's like in America, but yes.
Thank you, Sebastian, for this discussion, for your presentation. This is clearly a topic of concern to everyone, as we have been discussing it for over an hour and a half, and it is one of the longest seminars in our series. We are, of course, all watching with interest how things will develop in the archdiocese within the Moscow Patriarchate. Will the tradition of lay synodality be preserved, or episcopal authority will be strengthened? Time will show, and we are in the very beginning of this renewal of the story of Paris Exarchate. And finally, I would like to give a word for the last commentary to Irina.
So I'm going to thank everybody for very active participation, and especially Sebastian for working very hard. And I just wanted to mention that this year our seminars Understanding Sobornost will be over. So this is our last seminar because Vera Shevtsov, who was planned to be presenting in December, so she's going to speak in after the new year, so we will find another time. But please stay with us, and we will have more seminars coming next year. So, and keep healthy, as is very now important thing to say. So I hope that we all see each other in person at some point. So I'm I'm just very, very, very grateful that you managed to find time for this seminar. Thanks. Bye.